All right, Merry Christmas. Man, it's so good to have you guys with us. We are kids. We're one sleep away from the big day. How are we feeling about that? Parents, how are we feeling about it? Equal? Murmurs and low rumble. All right, you got to be honest. You're in church. Hey, we're glad you're here. My name's Chris, and I get to be one of the pastors around here. And anytime people choose to spend time with us, we consider it a privilege, but especially on Christmas Eve as we celebrate leading in tomorrow, one of the most important events in human history. And so we're glad you're here. Those of you joining in the cafe, we're glad you're here. Those of you watching online as well, thanks for being a part of our service. So in every single circle, every relational circle that you have ever had from the time, like it goes all the way back from the playground to the boardroom, from the dorm room to the nursing home, every human circle that you have ever been in, there is a person that no one likes and no one wants to be like. It's true, you just didn't expect someone to say it in church. But in fact, here's what I would love to do. I would love to just take a moment, if we could, just 30 seconds. I want you to circle up around just whoever's around you. Do this in the cafe as well. And I want you just to talk about who's the first person that came to your mind, and I just want you to describe them. You ready? Some of you are really nervous right now. You don't really have to do that. But let me just tell you, if we did that, that would be perhaps the most exciting 30 seconds that you have ever had in church ever. And also uncomfortable. And here's why. Because some of you are sitting next to them. Some of you gave birth to them. Some of you are married to them. For some of you, it's your ex, right? You know, every single circle, there's someone that no one likes, no one wants to be like. And some of you struggling to bring anybody to mind, you're like, I can't think of anybody. That's bad news because it might be you. If that's the case, which I'm just, Merry Christmas. It's the gift. It's the gift of awareness. As Cousin Eddie would say, it's the gift that keeps on giving all year long. I'll give you a couple examples of this in pop culture, all right, of the kind of people that no one likes and no one wants to be like. And some of them didn't start this way, but they ended this way. And there was one particular music group that came to my mind first. In fact, if I crowdsourced it, many of you would be able to call the name of this group. So it's this group right here. Anybody know who this is? Yeah. All right, so that's Nickelback. Some of you don't know if you don't know Nickelback. So they hit their peak somewhere in around, depending on what you describe as the top for them, somewhere around 2000, they were kind of the most popular. This is a grunge band after Pearl Jam and all that kind of era. And I don't know how it happened, but it happened that somewhere along the way, no one liked them and no one wanted to be like them, this group Nickelback. In fact, I found this critic online, and this is what he said, and I quote, "It is widely believed that liking Nickelback invalidates someone's taste in music." It gets better, it gets worse, and is often seen as a blemish on one's personality. Like just liking them calls your entire personality into question. Now, some of you were listening circa 2000 to music. You know who you are. And you were part of the thing that made them popular, the 50 million downloads or albums that they sold and the 5 or 6 Grammy nominations that they had. So in other words, we made them famous and then we decided to hate them. That's what happened, right? All right, let me give you another one. Here's another group. Anybody would say this group is one of them? The Kardashians? There's just so much happening. Like it's exhausting, right? And let me just tell you, it was extremely difficult to find a picture that was appropriate with kids in the room. Let me rephrase that. With humans in the room, like just any picture at all. There is so much happening. In fact, I found this top 30 most disliked celebrities list, and 5 different Kardashians and Jenners actually made the list separately, which collectively means it's really a bad day for them. I think they're at the top of the list. All right, here's another one. How about Jake Paul? Anybody? Jake Paul? So Jake Paul, YouTuber that becomes boxer. Listen, how are you going to hustle retirement Mike Tyson and not end up on the most disliked list? That's just wrong, right? I'll tell you another person that landed on the list, top 30 most disliked, no one likes, no one wants to be like, is this person named Chris Brown. But I don't want to talk about that tonight, in case you didn't catch my last name is Brown. But in every circle that you've ever been in, every human circle, there's someone that no one likes and no one wants to be like. In fact, this is true of the Christmas story. 2,000 years later, there's still one character in the story that no one likes and no one wants to be like. For some of you, it immediately comes to mind. Others of you, you'd have to search for it. But it's this guy. It's the innkeeper. or maybe it was a woman. We don't really know. Now, the innkeeper has gotten the short end of the stick in some of the most brutal Christmas sermons all throughout history. It's like, don't be like the innkeeper. And if you don't know why, the innkeeper is notorious because this is the person that had no room for who? Yeah, there's no room for Mary and Jesus to be born, right? This is a really disastrous situation. And so this is how Luke, the historian, captures this moment. Luke chapter 2 says this, says, and she, talking about Mary, gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in clothes. She placed him in a manger. For those of you that don't know what a manger is, it's an animal feeding trough because there was no guest room available for them. Or some translations say there was no room for them in the inn. Now, interestingly, or maybe ironically, this notorious innkeeper is never actually mentioned in the story. I think we just come to assume that since there's an inn, there must be an innkeeper. But what we're doing is we're kind of transposing modern times onto the old times. It was really not the same as it is today. In fact, most of these inns were like a detached room or a side room on someone's house or a barn. And for the most part, it was a very like rural and poor culture. And they were very hospitable. So if there was a guest traveling through town, it was very common to welcome them into your home. And oftentimes this was done without charging anybody anything. It was just hospitality. Now, in this culture, just like in our culture today, there were certainly probably, I guess, people that were opportunistic and that would take advantage of the situation. They would see a person coming through as income potential. Like it happens now, like if there's a disaster, like when the hurricanes come through, there are certain people that set up camp and they find ways to profit off of other people's pain or other people's need. And certainly there were people like that in this culture. But for the most part, people would let someone stay free. But again, there might be a few people that would choose their house guest based on income potential. Now, this census that Caesar decreed, which we'll read about this in just a moment as we read the rest of Luke's narrative. But this census actually caused large volumes of people to descend upon certain towns and different across the region all at the same time. And so literally people were coming from everywhere and there was no place to stay. Like you literally couldn't find rooms, even with your friends and family. You'd probably take care of your friends and family first, and then if there was someone coming in that didn't have friends or family, it was going to be a tough go for them. And so maybe, like as we look at this story, maybe Joseph and Mary didn't look like a good return on investment. Like, I don't know, maybe as pregnant Mary is on this donkey and they see Joseph coming along, this doesn't look like a rich crowd. And maybe the innkeeper passes him by and says, if I'm just patient, maybe the next caravan that's going to have a couple Cybertrucks in it, that's going to be a better return on investment, right? Some of you didn't know that was in the story. You should read it in Luke 2, right? Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there was this kind of moment of like, there's a better return on investment, but maybe there's another explanation.Maybe, on the other hand, this innkeeper that has been vilified through generations, maybe they weren't a bad person. We don't know if it was a man or a woman because we don't really know that they exist, but maybe they weren't a bad person. Maybe they literally, at that moment, their spare room was just full. Like, I'm betting, this is just my guess, that Mary wasn't wearing a maternity shirt that said Messiah on board. Like when they came through, like you think about it, like through generations, I think we act like, and sometimes people act like this innkeeper like intentionally rejected the Messiah. But how would they know? Like how would you know the significance of the story? We look back on the story, we have the accounts of so many that wrote about the story. We know the details, but how in the midst of the story would you know? I can't help but wonder this as I read this story. And I try to read this story every year with fresh eyes. I can't help but wonder if the person that no one likes and no one wants to be like in this story, the people that we least want to identify with in this story, I can't help but wonder if often those are the characters that most characterize us. Like, what if they were good people, but they were just busy? Like, they weren't bad people. What if they had a lot of opportunities around them? Perhaps, like in our holidays, they have a lot of distractions. What if they were good people, but they just got distracted? And somehow they didn't get the message. They didn't see. They didn't know what was actually happening around them. The angels had shown up already to some shepherds, but perhaps were about to show up to some shepherds right in the same time frame. Perhaps they didn't know anything about it because they were busy. Their heads were down. They weren't bad people. I want you to think about this, like just us in this room. Just a moment of honesty. We're kind of busy, right? Like, we're kind of a busy culture. Like, how many of you would say your life is a little bit full? It's a little bit busy in church with a little bit of honesty. I know it's not just me. Like, here's the thing. Sometimes we pass ourselves in the road. We pass our spouse, our kids, like in the road, going from one place to the other. Our lives are full. They're busy. They're full of drive-through lines, mostly Chick-fil-A, right? They're full of parking lots where we're picking up. We would never go into the grocery store, but we pick up our groceries in the parking lot. It's full of sports fields. It's full of all these busy narratives that run our lives. We live in one of the most affluent cultures in human history. And with affluence and with wealth comes opportunity to travel, opportunity to do all sorts of things, all things that aren't bad things, but they contribute to the busyness and the fullness of our lives. It's full of business, full of transactions, full of promotions, full of chasing kids around, full of chasing degrees, full of chasing all of these things. And somewhere in the midst of this, sometimes, if we're not careful, we just don't make room for Jesus. I mean, not because we're bad people, not always, not because we're like intentionally rejecting the story of Christianity, we just got busy and there was no room, or there is no room sometimes in our story for Jesus. And therein lies the problem. The problem is that sometimes we have convinced ourselves, sometimes I convince myself that it's my story, that it's our story. And there's a perspective shift. There's something that is off when that's the case. We have this door into our office. Our staff has an office right next to the cafe, right next to a co-working space where there's a lot of traffic, a lot of foot traffic. And there's this door that's tinted that as we look out, and this wasn't the intention, but it actually ends up working almost like a mirrored door. Now, it's provided quite a bit of entertainment for us because people walk up to this door and they can't see us seeing them. And so it's the last door before you go into the cafe or the co-work. So it's the place that everybody stops to sort themselves out. You know what I mean? And it happens all the time. But recently, there was a young lady, maybe college age. She parked. Let me just say, she parked herself in front of the door, and she was sorting herself out from every angle, front, back, side. We got, selfie faces being made. We're way back, then we're way up close again. And this happened for a really long time. And it was, what's the word? Awkward for us. Like we were all in there watching it. And so Jim, who was just up here, who's our executive pastor, he said, I'm going to go tell her. And he starts to go out the door. We're like, no. We're like, what are you going to do? Like say, hey, welcome to Ridge Church. Like there's no win. There's nothing that can happen that's going to solve it. My suggestion was just to record it. That also got shot down for the record. And so we just let it happen for a really long time. And as far as she knew, she was the only one in the world engaging with that door at that very moment. But little did she know, meanwhile, on the other side of the door, there's a whole nother world of people, a very real world of people that are watching this happen, but she has no idea. Trust me, the people on the other side of the door were 100% real, but not 100% real to her. And she's busy, and here's what she's doing. She's in this moment. She's orienting everything around her, everything in the world to her, and she thinks she's the only character in her story just because, and this is where it's for us, just because we spend our lives, and it's my tendency, it's all of our tendencies, orienting everything towards us, explaining things as how they orient to us, just because we spend our lives doing that. And just because we tend to think this is our story and there are other characters in it, doesn't mean that there isn't another story that's happening. It doesn't mean that's all there is. This thing that Luke says, it captures, when he says there's no room for them in the inn. This phrase holds a massive irony. Like, if you think about it, this is actually not our story. Though I've convinced myself at times, certainly your kids have convinced themselves at times, maybe they've convinced you at times. Like, we convince people, and we don't do it on purpose, right? It's just the gravitational pull of life is to orient as how things affect us, but it's not actually our story, it's his. I want you to think about this. There was no room for Jesus in not just the Christmas story, the human story. He is the most important character in the human story. And in this, there's no room for him. This is his world. You and I are just living in it. But sometimes, good people, just normal people like us that aren't like rejecting all the things, good people just get busy. And I find it fascinating, maybe heartbreaking is the right way to say it, that even in my own life at times, that the start to Jesus' story, the fact that there was no room for him in the end, has become the state of his story throughout generations. My life as well. Oftentimes there's just no room. Like, and here's, we don't say it out loud, but here's what we think. Jesus, when I'm done with college, 4 years. Okay, 5 years, Jesus, when I'm done with college. 6 years, Jesus, when I'm done with college. Like, Jesus, I promise I'm going to come back. We're just taking a time out. Jesus, trust me, you wouldn't even like the parties there. You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like the sorority fraternity. I don't think you would like that. Like, Jesus, we're going to come. Jesus, when the kids are out of diapers. Like when we sell the house, when I get the promotion, Jesus, when the divorce is settled and final because it's just so hectic and I can't even think straight, sometimes I'm going to come back to you. When we sell the business, when we retire, Jesus, I'm not forever, but just like we're coming back. It's just a brief pause, just time out. Jesus, we're just trying to catch our breath. And every generation, in every family, for every individual, for every person that's listening to the sound of my voice, the temptation for all of us, at some point, if not multiple points in our journey, will be to allow Jesus to be relegated to the background of the story that he was always intended to be the main character of. It's the tendency. And perhaps, like the innkeeper, maybe he was a good person despite the stories throughout history, was just busy, had opportunity, didn't see the larger narrative, didn't see, perhaps like the girl that's in front of the door thinking that all of the world is orienting to her and this is the only world there is. There's a whole nother world on the other side that is very real, and it's his story. I want to read the rest of the story. But before I do, I want to ask you a question. Why do you think that Jesus came in this story? Like, for some of you, you maybe have, as you become an adult, you relegated this to become just a story for children. But many of you in this room, you believe this story actually happened, that it's human history. Why do you think this bizarre story of Jesus becoming a baby, why did it actually happen? I want to read as Luke captures this. And one of the things I want to say before I read this, Luke, as he starts his historical account, he says, I investigated all of these things thoroughly. In other words, Luke's telling us out of the gate, I don't think this is fictional. It's like he knows I'm about to write down some things that are pretty audacious and big and hard to believe, but I want you to know I thoroughly investigated, and it's like he's inviting us to fact check him. He puts dates and times and gives us places where we can circle it up in history. It's almost like he's saying, hey, I want you to test me because I know it's going to sound like fiction, but it's not. And this is how he says it. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So he's basically saying, I want to figure out how big my province is because I want to make sure I'm getting all my tax dollars. Like they literally had taken over so many different people groups, they didn't even know how big their property and their people was. They didn't know how big their tax revenue should be. It says, and everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth, that's a detail, to Galilee, to Judea, to Bethlehem, all these details, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son, and she wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger, a feeding trough for animals, because, and here's why, there was no guest room available for them. I want to pull out of this story for just a second, skip forward 33 some odd years. There's this little portion of Jesus' journey right before he goes to the cross, right before his followers write about, because they've seen it, the empty tomb. Just before that happens, John, which I love this, John, when he talks about himself, he says, hey guys, I was Jesus' favorite. Like some of us thought we were parents' favorite. Perhaps they told you. There's counseling available for the rest of you if your parents didn't tell you that, right? But he's like self-proclaimed, I'm Jesus' favorite, and he records what Jesus said in this really intense moment just before Jesus goes to the cross, and Jesus is describing part of who he is and part of his nature, and he says this, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Then he makes this bold statement that no one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus says, I am the way. The way to what? The way to everything. Jesus is saying, hey, I'm the way forward in your marriage. I'm the way forward in the way that if you want to see the world around you in a proper way, I'm the way forward in that. I'm the way forward in your finances. In every relationship you will encounter, whether it's work or romantic, I am the way forward in everything in life. I am the way forward if you want to have a relationship with God. I am the way forward for eternity. He says, I am the way forward in everything. This is such a bold statement. And he says that I am the only way forward. If you take what Jesus says and you pair it with what Luke says that he was lying in a manger. And you take what Jesus says is there. He says, I'm the way in a manger, not a way in a manger. You don't have to retire the song. It's a good song. But what Jesus says is bigger. He says, I'm the way in the manger. To which some of you hear that and say, Chris, it sounds kind of exclusive. A way in a manger sounds better. This is where it gets good. This is how Luke wraps it up. He says, and there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night, and an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. And they were terrified, but the angel said to them, which I find this ironic, do not be afraid. Listen, if you see an angel, pretty much you're going to be afraid. It's an intense moment. And then the angel says this, I bring you good news that will cause great joy. And then I want you to say these 4 words out loud together. You ready? For all the people. This is it. He's saying this is good news. This is not exclusive. When I say I am the way for everyone. Continues, says, today the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This is one of the most beautiful things about the Christmas story. This is one of the most beautiful things about the gospel, about Christianity, about Jesus, is that as long as everyone is welcome, it can't be exclusive. And Jesus says, I'm for everyone. The angels say as he enters the scene that he is for all the people. So let me go back to the question I asked you before I read this passage. Why did Jesus come? Why this story? See, Christmas is the story of God putting out the welcome mat for everyone. That's why it's so beautiful. It doesn't matter who you are. God has put out the welcome mat. That includes you. That includes me. It doesn't matter what religious system you come from. It doesn't matter how good you've been or bad you've been. For some of you, you've been hurt by someone in the church, by someone like me, perhaps me. And it doesn't matter. You're welcome at the cross. In fact, maybe you've been on the other side. You've perpetrated hurt against others in your life, and you feel a level of guilt and shame. The cross is welcoming to you. The story of Jesus is welcoming to you and invites you. It doesn't matter your race, your age. It doesn't matter the quality of life that you have lived. The Christmas story is for everyone, including your boss, including your mother-in-law, including your brother-in-law. Everybody is welcome through the cross. Every time I read this story and teach this story, and I've done this many times through the years, I think sometimes we as pastors don't give credence to the fact that we're inviting people to a really big idea. Like, there are a lot of miracles and a lot of amazing things that I believe to be true in this story, but they're hard to wrap the human mind around. And so for some of you, if you come to a place in your journey where you tend to dismiss this story as a kid's story, or maybe it's a fabrication, or maybe you're Jewish or you're agnostic and you just don't know what to do with Jesus, I want to say I understand that. And I want to close by just reading an excerpt. This excerpt comes from a guy who's a pronounced and proclaimed atheist. But he's talking to a group of academic atheists about the idea of the historical nature of Jesus. And this is what he says. It's fascinating to me. He says, I suspect that many non-theists would love the vindication of discovering that the whole Jesus story was made up from start to finish, fabricated out of whole cloth and completely devoid of historical fact. But I don't think it makes us, and he's talking about academic atheists, look very objective when we too eagerly embrace a position. And when he's talking about position, he's talking about the position that Jesus isn't historical. Embrace a position which contradicts an almost universal consensus among those who have devoted their lives to studying these matters. We, of all people, should know better. Here's an atheist saying, Jesus is real, and history verifies it. Now, I realize that this is just one guy's opinion, but it's his attempt to be intellectually honest. With all due respect, I would say that the question tonight is not whether or not Jesus existed. History verifies that over and over again. The question is Jesus who he said? Like, is he really the Messiah? Is he really the Son of God? And if he is, and I think he is, and I've said this before, I don't think so because I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor because I believe the resurrection validates what Jesus said, who Jesus said that he was and that he is. But if he is, then it means this. It means that he is the way, the only way in a manger. And so my question tonight, as we kind of bring this service towards a close, is what would it look like for you to make room for Jesus? Now, it'll look different for you depending on where you enter the spiritual conversation. For some of you, the thing that it means for you is that tonight's the night that you take a step and say, you know what, I've never said that I want to follow Jesus, and I'm just making that choice. Jesus, I'm putting my faith in you. I'm going to follow you. For some of you, that's what it looks like to make room for Jesus. For some of you, that's a really big step from where you are. For some of you, perhaps the step that you need to take, the next thing for you, is to just say, you know what, I'm going to come back with some honest curiosity to this story. I think it's interesting, a lot of people that lose faith or abandon faith, they lose it, and then for 10 or 15 years, they never re-examine it again. We wouldn't do that with most other things in life, but what if you just came back to this story? What if making room for you meant just, I'm going to come back to this story with some curiosity? Because if it's true, and I believe it is, it changes absolutely everything. For some of you, making room maybe looks like making room for church again. Let it become a rhythm of your life, because Jesus said, hey, when you gather collectively together, there's something of me that you can experience in a certain way that you can't experience in any other way. And so for maybe some of you, that's the thing, is you make room in that way. Maybe for some of you, it's just making room for reading God's word again and praying and engaging with him as a father, not someone that's out to get you, but someone that loves you enough to send his son to die for you, just to engage. But whatever it is, would you make room for him tonight? So I want to end with a prayer, and I do this every single Christmas Eve, and through the years, I've had so many people that have shared with me that it was on one night like this that they put their faith in Jesus and became a follower. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that tonight. So if you bow your heads and close your eyes for just a moment. If you want to put your faith in Jesus, if you say, I'm not sure if I'm a follower, then just say something like this in your mind. Jesus, I believe you are the Son of God. I don't understand all the details. I can't put all of it together. But I do believe that you are who you say. And I'm asking you to become my Savior. I'm asking you to forgive me for my sins, and I want to begin the journey of following you. With your heads bowed and eyes closed still, I just want to say this. I think this is so important. Following Jesus doesn't necessarily mean resolving all your doubts and all your questions. It just means bringing them in tow. Following Jesus is the point where the undeniable starts to overshadow the unexplainable. So you can have things that you don't fully understand and bring them in tow as you follow Jesus and work that stuff out along the way. I want to pray for the rest of us. Father, I pray for your grace. And I pray for people that, like myself, from time to time, just without realizing it, good people, that we lose focus, God, and we start to orient the world around ourselves, and we just don't make room for you. I pray that you give us the grace to do that. You'd show us how, give us the courage to act on the thing that you put in our heart and our mind tonight. For those that prayed with us tonight, God, I pray that you'd welcome them as sons and daughters. For those that need to have the fires of curiosity stoked again, I pray that you would do just that. I pray all this in the precious and the powerful and the matchless name of the resurrected Jesus.